So what can we know about the characters in the story Jesus tells his audience? And how would peasants have reacted to this story, having heard it from Jesus? The landowner who owns a vineyard. You should know what that means. If a landowner owns a vineyard, he owns unjustly foreclosed on ancestral lands of peasants, turned the lands into cash cropping. This landowner has a steward, and this too suggests his elite status. Cato the Younger, who died 49 BCE, is a Roman writer and has a long discussion of duties and responsibilities of a steward. They were held very accountable. Cato becomes furious because one of his stewards does not wake up early enough and goes to bed before some of the other workers. The steward has to be the first one to wake up and the last one to go to bed. The fact that the landowner does not know how many day laborers he needs suggests that the vineyard is grown on newly acquired land. Think about it. The landowner goes out at 9 a.m., then he goes out at noon, then he goes out at 3 p.m., and then at 5 p.m. He's rather inexperienced in this enterprise. Why did he not know how many workers he needed for his vineyard? This suggests a rather detached landowner. That's what most landowners were. Probably with newly acquired land acquired to him through a kangaroo court, and he doesn't know how many day laborers exactly that he needs, so he keeps going back to get more. If the land is newly acquired, the threat of retaliatory violence looms. Remember the story we just read last night of the parable of the tenants. Again, we have a growing body of evidence from antiquity that this kind of retaliatory violence did in fact occur and was very common in the Middle East, of the world of Israel in the first century, in the Galilee specifically. If this is newly acquired land, understand that the story is set in a very high tension. A confrontation is brewing between the greedy landowner who has bribed the courts to acquire new land from peasant foreclosure and those peasants whom he has now hired as his laborers. It is probably unrealistic that the landowner comes to this vineyard, his own vineyard. He'd be in the city, safe, far away behind walls. This is the only story from antiquity where it happens, where the landowner actually comes to physically confront and be in the same space as the peasant laborers. Confrontations always would occur with the stewards, not directly with the landowners. But again, it is artificially being told to create the confrontation, which is the point of the story. The stewards are the agents of an absentee landowner. Normally, the stewards pay the day laborers at the end of each day. Why do they pay them every single day? Cato the Younger says, quote, "Do not ever hire the worker 2 days in a row. Do not ever hire the same worker 2 days in a row, because if you do that, they will begin to gain expectations." Cato warns his stewards that you never want a worker who develops a relationship with you. Because if you do that, they will begin to expect things from you and you will become obligated to them.
It happens today too.
Yeah, actually, here we have an interesting parallel in a terrifying parallel, in our Western, highly individualized society. This is the most individualistic society of all time, folks. How can I, who see myself as an emotional and cognitive universe separated from all of you, have solidarity with people who are suffering? Now imagine if I'm an elite in this society, and there's an island that goes through a natural disaster somewhere near. Obviously, I'm making this up because this kind of stuff doesn't happen in real life. How am I going to have any relationship with this? They're far away. Yeah. You see, that's from their world. But we need to be able to look at the wisdom of, see, where we need to go, I'm going to make a little suggestion here, that Americans have the good and bad of individualism. The Middle Eastern world has the good and bad of collectivism. Where human beings need to go is to become a chimera, the best of both worlds, into something new. And that happens when you're able to, in active listening and empathy, listen and actually appreciate the good of another culture. Whether liberal or conservative, in our society, we have a big thing with individualism. We're a universe unto ourselves. And therefore, I don't have responsibility to other people. But you look at people like migrant workers out, either down in Homestead or at Immokalee. There are 45, 60 people huddled together in a trailer, picking our tomatoes that we enjoy so much at the cheap prices on our Whopper sandwiches. These nothing people, these throwaway people, lowlifes like Mary and Jesus and Joseph, by the way. By the way, just saying. These people, see, they have something we don't have. The whole family, all in different rooms, every one of us online somewhere, in our own universe. And then the life passes away. And what happened? Okay, back to the first century. Cato wants his stewards to keep day laborers at arm's length and anonymous. We have handsomely here in America fulfilled Cato 100 times more. Because Cato figures this, if you can keep them at arm's length and anonymous, then you can treat them as employees and not friends. With friends you owe obligation to.
Then they won't become entitled.
Right. If you were to see the social stratification of the ancients, day laborers in most societies were ranked below slaves. They were either the non-inherited sons a farm couldn't support or peasants who had lost their lands to debt foreclosure. They are the outcasts, the marginalized, the most marginal people in any society. Yes, Begonia?
Is it because slaves, at least you own them? And therefore, because you own them,
They're part of your family in the first century. Not like post-industrial slaves and just prior to the post-enlightenment slavery of the Western world. It's still bad. It's horrific. I mean, you look at the way slaves were treated in Pompeii. Real horrible. The clouds coming over from the volcano. The lady's like very malnourished, holding the baby up. And they're encased in ash like that.
so it was understood that a slave was owed something. They were under your roof on some level.
Yeah.
Versus you can completely forget about the...
Also, if you're a slave, you're being owned by probably an elite. So your life is but if you're a peasant,
Not even old.
you're starving with 50 to 100 people in your household complex in the Galilee somewhere. Where does Jesus get his stories from, folks? And then we read them so glibly and so, And then Jesus said. And Jesus is all, handsome and hair washed with Vidal Sassoon. Long hair, too, which would, by the way, any first century Mediterranean would say transsexual as soon as they see something like that. Because you have short hair in first century Mediterranean world. Yes? Yes, folks. And I mean that in the way that's like you're not a man. Man has to be master of language and can hang on a cross for 6 hours without complaining. Not a little cute lamb. A ram that's dragged off and doesn't scream before it's slaughtered. So that a Roman guard can look at him and go, that's a badass. I mean, truly he's the son of the gods.